nerdjachos and nerd guests, how's it going? So if you're new here, welcome aboard, and if you're coming back, then it's great to have you back. You're all very welcome here on this channel, and if you're finding me for the first time, then I'm just some random guy who plays way too many Tycoon games, spent far too many hours in Planet Coaster than I care to admit. And I've also published a few videos of a park I'm working on as well called Culwell Wonderland. I'm going to do a series that finishes that off, but I also play other games like Planet Zoo, Airport CEO, Mad Tower Tycoon, Ostriv, all those kinds of games. So if you're a fan of all of those kinds of games, then you know what to do if you want to know about new episodes that are coming up. Subscribe button. So today we're back in Planet Coaster for something really special. I'm so excited about this, like unreal excited. So a few years back I designed a scenario for Planet Coaster that was called Vista View, and at one point it was the most subscribed item on the workshop. And then the Lady Designer did a whole Let's Play series on it. And the baton has now been handed to Paulsley, who's using the same scenario for a park that's called, I think it's pronounced Arbor Valley. But you know all that already, right? Because you've probably come here from there. So I've been invited to add my sprinkle of park realism to a new wooden coaster that Arbor Valley is going to open. But that's enough of the instructions and everything. Let's just do a real quick park tour just to see what has been done with the park so far. So Delay Designer's whole series was brilliant. It was so good. So I'm so excited to see what's happened in this one. Obviously it's different parks, both started from scratch, and I know that there's been a few changes that have been made to this park, because when I had originally designed the scenario, things like hotels weren't in, restaurants weren't in, the games and vending machines and whatever weren't in, so it needed a bit of modernisation. And I just never did that. So this is the park as it is, and I mean it's mostly looking as it did originally. It looks good. Loving that we've now added the vehicles. So we didn't have cars and we didn't have vehicles in the game when I designed the scenario. So I just left the parking areas blank. So it's good to see that it's now been filled in. So staff area looks good as well. We've actually got a staff area. Before I just left it as a hut with a car park, and this was before I did any kind of realism in parks. It was my attempt at realism, but this is cool. This is good. It's giving off a very westerny, like wooden theme. It's very nature reserve theme. It gives those kinds of vibes. Oh, I love this staircase going up is cool. That looks so good. Okay, and that goes up into the park, so that would be staff only. Okay, and the lake. So these were the sort of vistas that I was going for. This whole lake, the cliff face, hiding everything behind it, and it was like a nature reserve that was like a big circle. And so the idea was that there's a train that goes all the way around the outside, that goes up to the top, and then comes all the way back down, and it's sort of hidden and nestled through the trees. And the whole idea of the scenario was it was supposed to have been a nature reserve that needed to make money, and they were going to do that by having a theme park. And so I wanted to keep the area quite small. Obviously, you have the whole map to play with, so you can go all out and go wherever you want. But the actual main play area was supposed to be quite small, and I deliberately made it quite hard and hilly because I wanted to have like this sort of vista where you have these rolling hills, and so it was inspired by a nature reserve that was quite close to where I lived at the time, up in the north of England, and it was a very similar setup where you park off site and you walked to an area that had this kind of it didn't have a train, but it had this kind of setup where you got to the top and it was just a cafe and a beautiful view, and so that's what I wanted to capture here. And I think there's been some changes that PausLey's made along here. Fences and whatever have been swapped out. So the fences that I designed at the time were fit for purpose of the time of Planet Coaster, but we've got better things in games since then, so it only makes sense to update that sort of stuff. Yeah, so great. So we've still got some space. We've still got some space up here. We've still got some stuff that we can do up here. if we were looking at putting coasters in, but then it's difficult to work with the terrain. Like what do you do for landscape? Do you put the coaster up here and then bring it round the hills, or do you do it in the more obvious place? Oh, autosave. And the more obvious place that would be down the bottom. Okay, so what else have we got anyway? Let's see, because this is going to depend on where we're going to put the coaster, isn't it? So we've got some sort of camping village. This is nice. This is really well done. It's just so, yeah, look at that. Like this. Okay. So this is toilet block. It's another toilet block. There's a lot of toilet blocks. I bet this looks good at night, doesn't it? Okay, so I'm getting from the park feeling. I like this split level. This is good. Like where it's separated by the trees next to the railway. What's he done with the? Oh, he's put some rocks in. Oh, that's a clever idea. Oh, I'd never even thought of doing that. I would just use the terrain and then try and hide it, but that's genius. Okay. So I'm still getting this vibe of nature reserve. We've added a couple of rides, so we've got a Ferris wheel, we've got our chair swing, and we've still got our original feature guest shop, and we've still got the original features of the entrance. So we're thinking small park. We're not talking massive park. We're not talking super generic in terms of the likes of Six Flags or anything like that. If anything, this is giving me vibes of Oakwood in Wales, and how that's put together. It's very generically themed, but it's sort of like natural themed. It's in the middle of almost a field. It's in the middle of nowhere, foresty type area. In fact, I think it's next to a quarry, but like the actual area itself is quite sparse. It's not heavily decorated. It's not heavily themed. It's not heavily anything. It's there. So, and we've got a couple of rides that's going to give us a few clues as to how we should be doing this kind of thing. This roller coaster. We've got our ship there. So we've got really two places that we've got. So for those that may not already know, I work for a theme park company, so I get insight and information as to how theme parks should be laid out, put together, guest sight lines, where facilities should go, the kind of guest flow, where they would walk, where you don't want them to walk, and health and safety rules and regulations and those sorts of stuff. And so what I try to do is apply a lot of real world logic into Planet Coaster, but keeping it Planet Coaster playable. There's no point wasting an absolute load of time doing something in Planet Coaster that serves no purpose. So sometimes you just have to do, it's my favourite word, a facsimile of things like maintenance sheds, maintenance areas and everything, knowing full well that they don't serve any purpose in Planet Coaster, but they need to be there to serve the realism. And so the first thing that I'm thinking of here is that we've got this campsite area that's going to need to have some kind of peace and some kind of tranquility to it. Now, during the day, the park's going to be noisy, the park's going to be operating, but I'm thinking more late in the evening and early in the morning when things like ride tests are done and park maintenance is done and the inspections are done and everything. That's still quite noisy, and sometimes can be noisier than the actual operation of the park itself. So we've got two real sites that we can put this wooden coaster on. We can either go the obvious place, which is down the bottom here, and keep it close to the staff area where you've got access to maintenance through this area here, and then it's far enough away from the campsite area that it's not going to cause much noise pollution. Or we can go at the top here and face the coaster out this way so that we're shielding the noise using the trees that we've got here. We're using this space that's small enough to put a coaster station in, but not an actual coaster itself, and then go out to the forest and back again. So there are two real sites that we've got. Okay, so in terms of the design brief that we've got then, so we know it has to be a wooden coaster because of the palette of, well, it's partly the brief that's been given, but the palette of the actual park itself has to stay true to that. So at the moment we're not talking big steel coasters, we're not talking behemoth of roller coasters or anything like that. We're talking a wooden coaster. We're talking a coaster that would be around about 20 years old, maybe, well kept, well maintained, but rickety and aging is pretty much the brief. And so because this park is giving off vibes of the likes of Oakwood, I think the roller coaster itself is going to be giving off the vibes of Megaphobia, and that's that sort of thing. So I think I'm going to take some inspiration from how Oakwood have done Megaphobia, but I'm also going to take some inspiration from some of the other wooden coasters around. So we're not talking things like El Toro. That's going to be way too big budget. That's going to be way too imposing. And we're not talking crowd draw. We're talking potentially the park's first big investment that they made back in the day, and we're talking medium-sized budget. We're not thinking massive themes. So we're not thinking Wicker Man style, where you've got some kind of central theming element and loads of effects that go on. We're just talking simple, effective, airtime filled, slightly rickety wooden roller coaster. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm not going to do a time lapse because the way that I build, I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I like to change my mind a lot, and these things really take time to plan out. So I do this in like stages, in updates. So what I'll do is I'll go away, I'll build a piece, I'll come back, talk through how this is all how it's all come together so far, talk you through any of the design tips and design techniques that I'm doing, and talk you through the logic behind where things are being placed and why they're being placed, and then break away, do another update, and then come back. And then by the end of the video, you'll then have a whole completed coaster that we'll be able to look at. So with that in mind, and 12 minutes later of me just waffling on to myself, I'm going to give you the first update. Are you ready? Go. Alright, so here we are. We've got ourselves a completed coaster, all smoothed out, all everything. So I've decided to put it at the top of the hill, rather than at the bottom of the hill. There's quite a few things that I sort of considered when deciding its location. It felt like this bottom of the hill was better suited for things like shows, restaurants, plaza areas, hotels, and that sort of stuff. Think along the lines of Dollywood and how the layout of Dollywood is, where you've got all of your intermediate attractions down the bottom of the hill, and your roller coasters are situated around the hills to draw your guests away from your main area. So that's kind of the design principle that I've gone for here. I've also gone for the monster, so that it's got quite high capacity with 3 trains. It could run 2 quite happily, but I've just done 3 because it's more efficient if the park gets busy, but it would happily run 2 and still be fine for capacity purposes. And it's also terrain hugging, so I sat and watched the park for a while and I got a feel for how it's been put together. And to feel for where the guests are going and everything. And it felt like Arbor Valley would want to have added some kind of large-scale attraction, but for as minimal cost and minimal resource as possible. So it felt like this coaster had to be terrain hugging. It had to go along with the sightline of the park. It had to go along with the terrain level of the park. For a couple of reasons, really. Firstly, if it's terrain hugging, you don't need as many resources to build it. You don't need as much wood or concrete and etc. And then you can also use the hills to profile your drops and profile your turns, and you can get the most out of it for as least as possible. So this is the idea of this ride. Is it's designed to milk as much as it possibly can from the landscape without damaging it too much. So I've removed minimal number of trees, and I've only lowered land where it's needed to be lowered. Otherwise it's built around the land, and I think I've only done it in 2 places where I've changed the land, and even then it's only minimal. So should we go for a tour? So we're going to start off at the bottom of the lift hill here. So there's the drop into the lift hill, and the reason for that is it reduces the stress on the actual lift hill chain if you can put a drop into it. So if you can hit the lift hill about the speed your lift hill chain is going to be, then it reduces the strain and it reduces the cost. I don't know if this necessarily would have been technology that would have been around at the time of this coaster being built, but it's certainly something I'm using now. Maybe we can say it's been reprofiled since. The lift hill itself, 30 degrees, it's your pretty standard lift hill design. They can be as shallow as 20 degrees, they can be now as tall as 45 degrees, or as inclined as 45 degrees. But this is 30, and it's at the speed of 10 mile an hour, so it's not fast, probably a bit too fast, but it's not fast, it's not slow. And then you go into your first drop. It's a real shallow drop because it's working with that terrain. Again, I didn't want to remove any terrain needlessly, because I know it's going to build up speed throughout the rest of the course because this is the highest point of the ride. So your first drop's 56 degrees, and it gets up quite a nice little speed to jump into this first bunny hop, and it's a weird shaped bunny hop. It's just a bunny hop. But the idea is you get the airtime at the top here, so you descend and ascend quite steeply, but then you go over the top and you get that sort of projector airtime. In fact, that's probably more floater because the speed that it takes it. And then it comes into the first turnaround, so it's banked. And the technology at the time of this coaster being built would have been that airtime hills would have been perfected, bank turns would have just about started to be introduced, but you're still dealing with the limits of wood. So at this point, prefabs didn't necessarily exist, where it's built in a factory and then shipped onto site. This coaster would have been built on site using the wood either from the area or from the local area, and it would have been made by hand. So you're limited with what you can do in terms of banking, in terms of speed and structural integrity. So it goes into this first turnaround and then into the bunny hop hill, and again this is working with the terrain just to keep as much of the resources saved as you can possibly get. And then it comes into this almost banked turn into a drop, and that just creates that again floater airtime where you've just got that feeling of dropping over the top. And then it goes into a bunny hop and into a turn, and the idea here is to get as many head choppers in as you can on this turn, so it crosses over 2 pieces of track. But also because I wanted it to come around and hug the hill as much as possible. So I could have just carried it on this way, but then you're missing the opportunity of using this space here for anything. So I wanted to bring it back round into a bunny hop and into a bit of an S bend turnaround. And again, it's using that terrain to cut down the number of resources that you're using. It's a flat curve. It's not in any way it's not got any height to it. It's not got any drop to it, because it's borrowing the terrain here to actually have its curve. And then it goes into a double down. No real reason for the double down other than I wanted to draw out this drop so that it can go underneath the bunny hill and over the curve, the turn that we've got here. So the only way you can draw it out is by doing a double down. And then it comes up and over, and again it follows the hill, but this time I've not banked the turns here, and that's just to give a little bit of variation to the forces that you've got on the coaster at the moment. It's all about floater airtime, it's all about curved banks, and this is now sort of the first time you're going to get proper laterals and thrown into the side of your seat. So it just gives a bit of variation in the ride at midway, at the point you're probably getting a bit bored now by having airtime hills. But it also interacts quite nicely with a railway line, so that this is done by design in that sort of slight S-bend to it, just so that it interacts with this railway line. And then it comes into this weird figure of 8 like turn. So I thought long and hard about this one, because the original layout I had went into a bunny hop here and into the final turn and around, and it wasn't until I sort of sat back and again I thought about the brief of Arbor Valley, wanting to add as much thrill for as little cost but high efficiency as possible. And so it felt that with this part of the layout where it borrows so much from the hill, they could use fewer resources to have a longer track than they would have done if they just had a bunny hop here. So what I did was I sort of curved it round really tightly, and then brought it back down really tightly and then back up on the side of the hill. And so what they've done here is they would use less wood by doing it this way, and they would then milk just that little bit more out of that ride. So it adds maybe 5 or 6 seconds to the ride. But it adds 5 or 6 seconds. That's a long time when it comes to a coaster, and it means as well that they're using fewer resources to build that part of the ride. So it felt that would be like a bit of a natural way of doing it. It also gives a little bit more space to be able to do this final curve and get it over the railway track as well. So it's not so close to the railway track as it would have been, and it also gives a little bit more of room to come around here. And then I wanted these final, with the autosave, I wanted these final 2 curves to be quite tight as well. So because they're not being taken at great speed now. You've lost a lot of the speed as you're going around the course, so you sort of want a little bit of a more thrilling end where you can't provide airtime, so we're just going to provide some tight turns instead. And then I've then just started to plan out where things are going to go. So here's my maintenance shed planning, and I always put the maintenance area in first, so I know what area I've then got to play with in here. So I'm going to go over the principles behind the area design and where I've placed things and everything in other updates. I don't think we should do that now. But that's the tour. I'll put a POV of this up as well once everything around it is built, and I'll stick that at the end of the video, so you get to see what that's like on ride. So let's get to the next update. Alright, so time for the second update, and we're starting to make some progress on the actual area of the ride and the surrounding areas, and we're starting to consider things like sightlines and guest flow and everything, especially with the small area that we're working with. It's quite a tight, compact area to put as much as you possibly can in, and so I've done some work around the maintenance area here, and I wanted to get a feel for where the maintenance areas would be, how it sits on the landscape, and how much space it takes. So what I've done is I've gone out of my comfort zone a little bit. So normally I would just build a shed like this that sits beside the track, and then you have a transfer track, and it represents that job done. But the normal design that I would use for the actual coaster that we've got here is far too big. You need to be a bit clever with space, because this is essentially the space that you're dealing with to put everything that you need in, and it's not a lot of space at all in any way, shape or form. So what I've done is I've done this like double transfer track here. So it's a way of almost halving the amount of space that your maintenance areas take up, while doing it the other side of the track as well. So I've put these two down, and essentially what would happen is when you wanted to bring a train in, you'd bring it in, and then it moves to the side, and then there'd be a second train on here. So you've almost got like a double platform, and it slides from side to side, and that's how you input that movement. You wouldn't necessarily put them into a shed, you wouldn't roll them off the track or anything like that. It's just there. So I've started to put that together, and I started to detail the area as to how I want it to look. Not going for theme, is going to be very lightly generically themed. I don't think this area would have a theme as such. I just think it would be a wooden coaster using the style of building that we've got up here. So I've borrowed a lot of the styling that we've got. I've put down some of the queue as well, and so I've cattle penned it. That's going to be obvious. That's going to be the best way of getting the most amount of space out, or most amount of use out of the space that we've got. And we've also got the facility, if we wanted to extend this and put the cattle pen underneath the station as well. We've got enough space, we've got enough room. So if we wanted to include any more space, then that's fine. So what I think I might do is just check how many guests this is going to attract to know what space we're going to need. And then what I've done is I've had a look at the actual area that we're using. So I've just laid down some pathways at the moment just to get a feel for what the guest layout is going to be. And so I think what I've settled on is that your guests are going to come off the ride here, come out of the exit, they'll go down a shallow ramp, and they're going to come into a gift shop. And then from the gift shop, they've got two ways of dispersing. They can either head straight on and into the food court area, where they can then go and grab something to eat and move on whichever way they want, or they can come out this way and into a bit of a plaza area. So I've made these bits wider so that you can get as many guests through as possible, remembering this is going to be a throughput machine, so it's going to be loading and offloading guests a lot. I've tried to keep the entrance and exit as far away from each other as possible and facing different directions, so that your guest flow isn't in the same area. So guests are probably going to come up from this way to the ride, and they'll be exiting the ride this way. They may then decide they're going to go down the hill, but by the time they hit this point, it's already filtered into a natural way of walking, into natural directions and everything. So you're already starting to split off here and disperse your crowds where they are. But it's ultimately monetizing the area, because you've got a gift shop that you have to leave by, so you've got no choice but to go via a monetized place where you can say buy things. I don't think you've necessarily got space here for games. I don't know if I'm going to be able to put something in. I might try and put something in here, but then it's a little bit closer to the food area, so I need to see how the gift shop feels to know what to put in. But that's where we're at the moment. So in terms of sightline, we've got some varying heights here. So I like the queue is going to be on a level, and it's slightly raised from the pathway as well. So it gives you just a little bit of sight variation, but it's also level in the sense that your sight line is straight from this part and it continues straight until you get to the gift shop. So you've got this plateau, and then you're looking up at the ride itself, so all you can see is the lift hill, and then you've got some great photo opportunities from this bit as well. So when you come to here, you're looking up at the ride and you can see that everything's going on behind these shops and facilities. So I just need to decorate this area, start putting this into place. I was thinking along the lines of having steps that go here. So I've got steps that go down, and then along here, and have some decorated area in the middle, and then the ramp for access. So if you've disabled access, you would be along this side as well, and that's because it follows the curvature of the hill, whereas this one is almost like falsely raised up. So that's where I'm sitting with my thoughts at the moment, and so I'm liking how it's coming along. Actually, it's coming along quite nicely. The maintenance shed is sitting quite happily in the area that it should be, and it's not dominating too much. So cool. So let's go to the next update. Alright, so we've made some progress. We've opened the coaster, so we know how popular the ride is to know how many guests are going to be congregating in this area, and this now will also give us a feel for guest flow and where they're coming from, where they're going to, and making sure that all of the principles that we had in the previous update, they're all in place and they all stand true, they're all ringing true. And I've also done some more detailing work as well. So the way that I'm working with this one is I'm starting to look at sight lines. So I'm working based on sight lines and how I want things to be. So what I do is I part build things just to get a feel for how they sit on the sight line, and then I go on and finish them. So for example, you can see on the station area, I've just got the one piece of the actual station. And to be honest with you, I hate building stations. It's my least favourite thing to do. I just, everything just daunts me about it. But it's fine. I've started it on this one, and so I'll show you what I'm working on, and it is very, very, very inspired by the Megaphobia station. That's a very simple, very clean, very wooden design, but it's very effective. It does what it does really, really well. I've also started to get a feel for the shape of the shop, the gift shop. So obviously you're going to be exiting by the gift shop, and I want to give a bit of variation to the way that shops look, but also stay true to what we've built already in terms of the restaurant and the train station and the toilet block here. It needs to stay true to that kind of style. And I've also struck across a couple of genius ideas that I've never even considered doing before. These fences, I wanted something that was a little bit like the spooky fence, but the spooky fences are a bit thin. So I wanted something that had a bit more clout to it and a bit more depth to it. And so these, if I get one, they're just made up of your normal beam, your wooden post, then the wooden mouse crossbeam that you can use, and then these street lights sunk into the ground, and it just creates this off-center, off-balance wooden effect of a fence, and so you end up with this sort of effect, and I think it looks really, really, really good. And I'd never considered doing that before. I just randomly came across it, just looking for some kind of thin beams to use. Yeah, and I stumbled across that one. So as you can see, I've also done the queue line in terms of fencing and whatever. Wanted to keep it super simple. No real depth to it, no theme to it. It's just generic. And again, remembering that cost would be an issue here. So we're not going to be spending loads of money on decorating a queue line. We just need to make it functional. So these would typically be your steel rails. You could just carry on the fence design, the accent of the fence design around the outside of the concrete pad, and then this is just the firehouse stuff that I've laid down. And the reason I do that is because it hides the gap in the queue line. I don't like using the queue line curbs I like to have the ability to be able to do this sort of effect where it just looks like a big concrete pad. And then for here, because it changes terrain, I've just made them steps. The guests clip through them, but it's believable as a step. But then I also wanted to keep this as a ramp, and I didn't want to put steps in here because it's too steep. It's too steep to put steps in. Really, it's not really viable. So yeah, I just kept it as a ramp. The other stroke of genius I had was this. So in Colwell Wonderland, I've been using the concrete pillars as almost curbstones, but the edges of planters and whatever. And I came across this, your Spook Central window sills. And I've never noticed that these. I just sort of ignore the pack, really. I don't really use much from it other than the firehouse roof. But I've noticed these, and they are brilliant and perfect for lining off planter areas and lining off curbstones where you want them to be slightly raised, but you don't want them to be walls because they're slightly thinner on here than the walls are here, and they look better. And it also enables me to vary up the textures that I've got in the area too. So like this is still borrowing very much from the brickwork that's on all of the other buildings up here. And then I had originally this walling continuing all along here and down, and I think it was just too much. And now this breaks up the textures that you've got in this area, and it just creates a bit of a difference on the sightline. And again, looking at the sightline, so the shop sightline would look something like this. So again, this just gives you an idea of the shaping of the shop before you start detailing it, and then how it's going to block and interact with the sites that you see for the coaster. So I'm pleased with this sort of view, that from here you can still look through the trees and you can see the majority of the actual coaster itself in the background, and you can see it sort of doing its thing in the distance. Oh, it's just broken down. Oh no. So yeah, the next thing to show you is the station. So this is what I've done with the station, ready for it to be copied across. Super simple. A couple of planks just to make it look like it's either side, and then you've just got pillars. And I've just put some bracing in, so you will have 3 bracing strips, and then you've just got the diagonal braces that go like this. And then on the underside of the roof, you've got these pillars as well, so they would be like your horizontal braces. And then that's just going to copy across all the way with the roofing, and it'll just go across this way. Then I just need to do some kind of barrier for the 2 pathways along here. Don't know what they're going to look like yet. There'll be they won't be these fences because you can't tilt them, you can't change the angles. But yeah, so there'll be something there. And then this is the work I've done on the backstage area, so I think this is pretty much complete now. And the thing with backstage areas and the thing with Planko is everything always looks really clean and really new. You can't age things really well without putting vegetation and stuff down. But I've just done some tweaking work along here just to line up the beams so that they're in line with each other, and it's not so messy, it's not so slapdash. And then I've just done some detailing on the shed, put some windows in, put some clutter around just to make it look like it's busy. But also thought to myself, right, because the queue comes really close to this area, so it needs to be hidden. So there's your fence that goes around and it just hides the clutter. So you can still see the shed. You can't get away from that. It is what it is. I mean, we're going to put some vegetation in here anyway just to hide it, but that's what you can do, right? So yeah, and then your sight line from your queue line looks right up the lift hill as the train descends the crest. So yeah, it's looking good. So I'm going to carry on and try and finish this. So I'll see you for the next update. Alright, so it's time for the penultimate update, and as you can see, there's been some progress has been made. So the station is largely done, it's pretty much how I want it to be, and so's the gift shop as well. The gift shop now has come together and it's now looking how it needs to be. Both now just need those fine refining tweaks, you know, the bits where you do the landscaping, the bits where you do the planting and everything. And likewise with the area around as well, you can see that it's largely now as I want it to be. So before I start doing all of that landscaping, before I start doing the plants, before I start making it look good, I just wanted to do the real quick update just to show you the extra little things that I do to add the realism. And so, as you've seen, I do things in stages. So we started off very at the beginning, doing the maintenance area and making sure that that's kind of serviceable and it's fit for purpose and it does what it wants to do. It has all of the necessary things that it needs: transfer tracks, equipment, a shed to work from, access to the road. So we've dealt with that kind of realism. We then delved into the guest eye a little bit and said, right, okay, how do we hide this, or how do we at least make it less of a monstrosity? And so we've done that. We've also done the same sort of around here, where we've started to do fencing and have a look at this. But now it's time to do what I call the safety pass. So this is the element of realism that a lot of people tend to miss when they do their coasters and when they do their rides. It's the element of keeping your guests safe. Now, different countries will have different health and safety laws, and what isn't and isn't acceptable is down to each individual country. I've seen some parks where I've looked on Google Maps and there's no fencing at all in certain places, and you see others that are like Fort Knox fencing behind everything. So it's down to you to decide what your reel is. But what I do when I'm doing a coaster, and obviously I use as much of UK health and safety law as I possibly can, which is all about risk prevention, not risk aware. And so I'll always do a pass and say, right, okay, where are my points that a customer or a guest would be able to interact with the ride, and do I need to fence it off? What's the danger to that person if they were to be in that area? And so when you're dealing with a coaster that has a lot of path interaction, what you'll do is you'll tend to fence off the low-lying areas, the bits where a guest could potentially climb onto the track, for example. That's the obvious one, right? And then you'd have your path interaction in between, and the stuff that flies over the top, you consider netting and you consider things like that. So for this coaster, we've got a couple of risks that we need to be aware of, actually. Like a couple of things that we really should look into. The first one is the railway track. So the railway track, if there was a breakdown and you had to evacuate guests, you would need the ability to separate the roller coaster and the railway line from each other, so that they could still remain in operation whilst you're evacing the railway. So what I've done is I've just put a line of fencing all across. So this is like your decorative fencing, and I saw this at Gardaland in Italy. Actually, this is where this inspiration's come from. So I put the line of fencing that goes from the station right across, and then I've put the don't die fencing across as well. So even if you were having an evacuation of the train station here, or of the train here, and people walking back to the station, you've still got the don't die fencing either side that prevents people from entering the right area, entering into the area. Now, because this is such a big coaster, I've decided just to fence off the perimeter. I haven't gone into any depth or any detail with the fencing. I've just loosely gone around the outside. The other thing that we need to be aware of is we've got really steep hills here, and so you kind of use the fencing to go along with the hill. Now we're playing with the game's fencing up here, so in real life this fencing would undulate with the terrain. It wouldn't necessarily be as stepped like this, but this just creates that bit of realism to say, actually, I've considered that a guest could get up onto this hill. I don't want them to go any further than this line because there's a ride area and there's a steep drop there. And likewise down here as well, I've done exactly the same. So here's a sheer cliff that we've got, and I've just put the perimeter fencing around the outside. Now, when it comes to the risk assessment, you'd kind of say, well, actually, does it need to be along the top of the cliff? Because nobody's going to be over here anyway, and nobody's going to be able to get up that hill. But this is where the UK part of it comes in and says, well, actually, even if they can't do it, you still do it. Like, you still do the fencing, just to have it consistent. You don't want to have any breaks or any gaps in that fencing anywhere that you even run the remote risk that somebody's going to be able to enter the right area, especially when it's travelling at speed. And so the fencing then just carries on over the hill, and it carries along like the flat area that we've got here, really close to the ride this time. And then the same principle here applies in the sense that you've got a sheer drop, so you just fence it off. And it goes all the way round, all the way round, all the way round, and it carries on until it eventually auto saves, and it meets the railway line down at the bottom. And what I've done with the fencing down at the bottom here is it doesn't need to follow the railway track, it just needs to follow the rough outline of the ride, of the coaster. Now this bit here, we've deemed that there's no real risk here. The train's travelling at a relatively slow speed by this point. It's lost a lot of its momentum. It's high, so you can't climb onto the track, and so you don't actually need fencing that goes all the way along. You just kind of fence off the important bit. So the fence here, you'll see it will come round and it goes back on itself here and then comes up, and so you've just got this bit in the middle that you can now use to put your vegetation and foliage and stuff in. The other thing you can do as well is use bushes and trees and whatever as barriers. So if you've got really thick shrubs like we've got over here, particularly around the top of the hills, you've got a slightly reduced risk in the sense that guests wouldn't be up there, and if they were to fall, they'd fall into the bush before they fall into the ride. So you have that element to play with as well. But I just wanted to give you that sort of insight as to the thinking that I have when I'm doing this kind of thing. And it's about the fencing off here. Like for example, it's not really a risky area, but you still fence it off because it's still underneath the ride. Anything can happen. People could drop something from the ride or whatever. So you just don't want people going into that ride area. And then you may also consider putting a cover on here as well, just to protect people. So with that in mind, I've done pretty much all of the safety paths that I want to do. So it's now just about dressing it up and making it look good. So here we are with that update. I always forget just how much gardening and landscaping can change your park and can change the final product. So here it is. Arbor Valley has a brand new wooden roller coaster called Tantrum. The area is now done, it's now finished. So I've gone along and I've done all of the gardening. So I've copied the idea from Colwell Wonderland with all of the bushes along the side of the paths, and then just bulked it out with some colour and some bushes and stuff, just to give it a bit of depth. It felt like Arbor Valley would have done that because it's a nature reserve, it's a nature park, so it would have wanted to concentrate on a lot of floral and a lot of flowers, but whilst keeping it wild. And so here is the final area that we've come together. So we've widened the path along here and created a plaza area, and we've also put the gift shop at the top here. And I like how the hill continues up to the gift shop. I think that's probably one of my favourite parts of this build, is the sense that you're walking up a hill and there's the gift shop in front of you, and it sort of like subliminally monetizes the area, in the sense that you either go right to carry on with what you're doing, go left to go on the roller coaster, but either way you've looked at the gift shop as you're doing whichever, so it's right in your primary view. And I love how the outside has come together as well with the ramp and the stairs. It just breaks up that sight line. It doesn't level off. It's not a flat thing. It just creates that variation in what you see. In the sense you've got the steps this side, but you're still keeping it accessible for disabled guests and everything on the left hand side going up to the ramp. The gift shop itself has had quite a bit of work done to it. I wanted to avoid using TMTK items. There's some brilliant items out there for gift shops that I've used way in the past, but I wanted to keep this build TMTK free, but then it felt like this build was a little bit stagnant, a little bit sterile. It didn't really have much going for it, and I thought, well, what's missing? And it was ride photos. That's what felt the most missing. So I moved across the Has Fantastic and the Looney Balloons, and I put the ride photos in, and I wanted to have it as a facsimile like we've done with the maintenance areas. It's representative, it's there, but it's not detailed, it's not fleshed out. Other people do a much better job of it than I ever could, so I'll leave that to them. But what I did was I'd ridden the roller coaster using the cam, turned the camera around, and then just taken a picture of each of the rows, and then just put those into screens, and so that creates this on-ride photo effect, which I think looks really good. Like, so effective. I've seen it done before. I can't remember which park I saw it in, but yeah, so I've seen that technique done before. Also, the flower beds along here, I've just used the roses climbing up the walls, but laid them on the ground and just coloured them off, and it just sort of creates a nice little flower bed along here. And I like the variation in height here as well. It feels like it should, like the original path would have come around here, and this would have been a hill that comes down, and they've cut this out to create the path, but they've they've kept this plaza area at the top here as well, so you've now got that variation in height. And we've just cleared the way along here just to allow guests to come out, but this is still the plaza area, and this is the next thing that I think Arbor Valley would need to consider. I didn't want to do too much to the area. I didn't want to edit this or anything, because that's not my place to do it. You know, it's not my park. But Arbor Valley would probably now take a decision on what they did with this area, because as you can see, this is now starting to get a little bit crushed and a little bit busy, and so they may consider either moving the cafe completely or having a different cafe, extending it out to here, making it bigger. I don't know what would happen, but it feels like Arbor Valley would need to do something with this cafe as part of this whole build, and would need to sort of extend it or create a relief somewhere else. But yeah, like I say, that's down to the next project. So the actual station itself has had quite a lot of work done to it. It originally had this brick all the way up, and it was just a slab of brick. It just felt like it was a bit cold and a bit lifeless. So I've taken some inspiration from the Dollywood wooden coaster, and the fact that the station has this sort of three-toned effect to it. So I've just put the brick along the bottom as a foundation. Then I've just done these planks that are on the wall. It just represents some kind of wooden planking, wooden decking or whatever. And they're just laid out one by one, and then randomly coloured, and then randomly rotated, just to give that variation. And then you've got the in-game wood that just finishes it off quite nicely. And then you've just got the pillars and everything. That they were already there. They've not changed. They've not changed at all. I've just added some bunting because I noticed that's really loud. I noticed it on the main entrance that this park is using bunting, so it just felt like that just needed to be there just to create a bit of consistency. Yeah, so the stations come together, and now it's consistent with the maintenance area that we've used the same wood, whereas before it didn't. So it felt a bit disconnected, it felt a bit disjointed. Now the only thing that isn't consistent is the roofing, but I've done that by design. I've done that purposely. It had to feel that this was a bit of a, not temporary, but they wouldn't spend as much effort or money on this area, right? Because guests don't see it, whereas this area they'd have more focus and more effort to it. So, and then the actual ride itself, I've not done anything to it. I've just added a few trees around. I wanted to continue this idea of the foresty area that we've got around, and it feels like this would go around the forest, but you would also still have openings and clearings along the way. So that's what I just wanted to do. I just wanted to bring the forest back down. And I've also continued that theme along the queue area and along the maintenance area as well, whereas before we had no trees because we'd removed them all to build. I just wanted to bring that forest back down and just to give it the impression and the idea that the only clearing we did was this bit here, just to put the queue in. Everything else we preserved nature wherever possible. And I've also, something that I haven't made very apparent throughout the whole thing, I've also kept a count of the number of trees that I've removed to build this, and made sure that I've replaced them elsewhere. So it felt to me that Arbor Valley would be very big on conservation, and whatever they do had to be considerate to the landscape that it's using. And so I thought that was quite a nice little touch, that I wanted to replace all of the trees that I had either moved or deleted to put the coaster in the area in. And so you'll now find those in this sort of area and around the ride. I've just added a few bits along here as well, especially with the safety pass. I just put the retaining wall in here. It felt like this hill was probably a bit too steep, and it was going to be a bit of a landslip risk. So I just put a retaining wall in. It's nothing special. It's just there just to represent the fact that there's now a landslip risk. It's now a risk to the coaster. There's another place that we could probably consider doing it, and that's here. But I think, looking at it, this is probably just shallow enough of a hill to get away with it. Don't think you'd need a retaining wall here, but that would be, if we were going to do one, that would be the other place I would consider, would be along here. And then you've just got around the back here. I've not changed anything. It's still as wild and shrubbery as it always was. And the actual maintenance area itself, nothing's changed. It's all just very bland. It's just maintenance area, isn't it? It's got the clutter still, but now it's a little bit hidden from guest sight. So from down here, you can't really see it. You know it's there. It's obvious that it's there, but we've made an effort to try and hide it where we can with the trees and everything. And then I've just tidied up the area. I've also done the pass as well of making sure that the ground isn't worn down wherever the roller coaster is close to the ground. And this is something I touch up on my top tips video, just making that realism a little bit more. But because the ground on here is already quite brushy and quite scrubby, you don't really see it. It's not as obvious as it would be if it was a well-kept grass park, but it is all along here. Look, you can just see that where the rain and whatever would have been coming off the roller coaster, it may have poisoned or damaged some of the ground underneath it, and the grass doesn't grow just as much. So I've done that all around the ride, just to keep that realism. And the last bit with the realism is the overgrowth. So the bits where the park may not necessarily be able to access to keep it up, I've just made sure it's a little bit overgrown randomly and sporadically, but not right up to the brick and not right up to areas, because it would grow just completely randomly. So you would probably maintain around the actual station area itself, but that would be it. And so yeah, that is everything. So from a guest perspective, this is what they see from sightlines. So from the actual pathway opposite, so this is what you would now see. It's looking really good. It's looking so good. Just see the lift hill, the drop, and then you just get the important parts of the coaster, the bits where people are going to be screaming. And if you look back, then you've just got nature in the shop. And then if you come back down to this area, you can see just the lift hill, just in time as well. So you see just the lift hill. Just as it crests over the hill, you don't see anything else. You don't see any of the rest of the ride. You just hear the screams. And again, from here you see the station. You don't see the maintenance area, and you can still get that sight line. And the important bit was this sight line. So this is going to be where most of the guests are going to be coming from, and so that's the sight line that they're going to see. So I wanted to sort of obscure the view of the station slightly, and just have the sight of the lift hill, and then you don't see what's the other side of the lift hill. So it's that idea of creating that little bit of secrecy, that intrigue. You go, what's all this about? And then you can either go left, right, or straight onto the gift shop. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is Timber Tantrum, and that's Arbor Valley's brand new wooden roller coaster. How about that? So if you've liked what you've seen, absolutely would love to have you come along for the ride. Subscribe, leave a comment, press a like, whatever you need to do. I like to reply to people that interact with me on videos and stuff. I love that sort of stuff, so absolutely. But I think we should probably give this a ride now, shouldn't we? We should absolutely give this roller coaster its due and take a ride. So let me say thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for subscribing if you do, and I will see you in future videos. But for now, let's ride Timber Tantrum. Take care.